Bulgaria held its third parliamentary elections on the 19th of April 1997. The newly formed best-spelled government of Jan Videnov decided to do a 180-degree turn when it came to reform, beginning with the freeze-of-all processes, moving the country towards a market-based economy, reversing back to a state-party economy much like the former communist regime. The percentage of state-controlled prices arose from 18.9% in 1994 up to 52.4% in 1996. This led to a drastic decline in the import of industrial goods to the country, since prices were no longer regulated by the free market. The first victims of these policies were industries whose business depended on import. This forced the government to draft a bill which forced the banks to give larger and cheaper loans to the business, while at the same time the government guaranteed the financial stability of the banks by financing them, thus giving them enormous social power. This new status quo was the perfect breeding ground for pyramid schemes to be born, as banks will offer unlimited loans to the economy without even expecting a return, while at the same time expecting additional financing from the government. But when the government had no more resources to finance the banks, they bankrupted. And with so much loaned and unreturned money, inflation rose to unseen levels at the time, in 1996 reaching up to 310%, while in early 1997 up to 486%. From 1997 up to early 1998, Bulgaria was the country with the highest inflation rates in the world, above countries like Angola or the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This hyperinflation and lack of import had created a food shortage in the country, as by the winter of 1996, everyday goods as bread, milk and butter were dropping in numbers but rising in prices, which led to a coupon system being enforced by the government, where each citizen would be given a certain amount of goods each month. The food-deprived winter of 1996 was known as Videnov's Winter. This series of economic downturns provoked massive protests across the country, mainly led by the CDC, which culminated into the storming of the National Assembly by protesters on the 10th of January 1997. This later led to the resignation of Prime Minister Videnov in 1997 as well, being possible because the BSP turned against him, as the deputy chairman and future leader of the party, Georgi Parvanov, called for the government's resignation. On the 12th of February, Prime Minister Videnov resigned, as new coalition talks began with the parliamentary parties. Newly elected President Peter Stoyanov gave the first government-forming mandate to the largest party, as it is by constitutional law, which was at the time the pre-electoral alliance of the Bulgarian Socialist Party. But a second BSP government failed to be formed, due to the fragmentations and popular distrust towards the BSP itself. And so President Stoyanov called for early elections to be held on April 10, 1997. Parties and coalitions. After their abysmal result during the elections of 1994, the CDC experienced a leadership change, with Dimitrov resigning and the energetic Ivan Kostov being picked as chairman of the coalition. Later in 1995, a broad center-right coalition was formed between all party members of the CDC and the Bulgarian Agrarian People's Union, the Christian Agrarian Party, the Inner Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, the Democratic Party and the Bulgarian Social Democratic Party, known as the ODC or United Democratic Forces. The DPS was too an early member of the ODC, but left the coalition months before the 1997 elections in order to form its own political coalition. On the left, the pre-electoral alliance of the Bulgarian Socialist Party experienced a complete overhaul, as most of the coalition's old administration was gone, and the former deputy chairman of the party, Georgi Parvanov, was chosen as the new chairman. The coalition renamed itself to DL, or Democratic Left. Former member of the Bulgarian Socialist Party, Alexander Tomov, formed a minor left coalition between the Civic Union of the Republic, the newly created Movement for Social Humanism, and the United Social Democrats. This new left bloc tried to abuse the decline of the Bulgarian Socialist Party and get votes from the dissatisfied BSP voters. This minor left coalition was known as BEL, or Bulgarian Euro Left. The DPS, after splitting from the ODC, formed its own political coalition, the first and only time in the party's history when the DPS ran in a coalition. Members of the coalition were the DPS itself, the Green Party, the Bulgarian Democratic Center, the Monarchist Federation for the Bulgarian Crown, and the populist New Choice. The coalition was named ONSC, or Alliance for National Salvation, and will later break up in 1999. The Bulgarian Business Bloc ran in these elections as well, but since the party was quickly disintegrating just after the elections, the party's chairman Georgi Ganchev resigned from the post of the leader of the Bulgarian business bloc. Results. After leading the protest movement for well over a year, the center-right coalition of the ODC won, winning 53% of the vote and 137 seats. Second came the Democratic Left with just 22% of the vote and 58 seats. After them came the ONC with almost 8% of the vote and 19 seats. Fourth came the Bulgarian Euro Left with 5.5% of the vote and 14 seats. And last came the Bulgarian Business Bloc with almost 5% of the vote and 12 seats. Coalition talks. Much like in 1994, these elections too produced a clear winner, the ODC. Newly elected President Peter Stoyanov gave Ivan Kostov the first government-forming mandate, with who the ODC formed a single-party government, initially supported by all parliamentary forces except the Democratic Left, but in time, one by one, the minor parties withdrew their support from the government.